Hello and welcome to my review of the Bellbird River Country Choir by Sophie Green. So, I needed a palate cleanser of a book. I've just read a couple of young adult magical fantasy. They are the Shadow and Bone series. I was waiting for the third one to arrive. I needed something in a different genre that palate cleanser, and this is a good palate cleanser. Now, I mostly review classic sci-fi and fantasy on this channel, but I do read quite a lot of Australian fiction, which I haven't reviewed that much of. Sophie Green is an Australian author that I am aware of. She's a Sydney-based author, and I'm pretty sure I've read books of hers before, though I somehow have never reviewed them, so I can't say which ones. The Bellbird River Country Choir is the sort of book that you read to have a cozy reading experience. It's not going to challenge you, it's not going to threaten you, it's not going to in any way probably challenge your worldview unless you've got a very limited worldview. It's got a specific target audience, like most of Sophie Green's books, as far as I know, do. It is what it is, and what it is pleasant. It's a pleasant reading experience. It's not a small book, but it doesn't take a long time. So, I believe that all her books follow similar motifs. They're set somewhere in Australia. In this case, it's set in the fictional town of Bellbird River. While it's fictional, anyone who's familiar with the inland New England highway area type towns is going to feel like they recognise this town. So the town I've probably spent the most time in, Armidale or Glen Innes, and aspects of Glen Innes really hit hard in this one. It's a small town, everyone knows each other. That's small towns all the way around the world. They're deep in each other's business and they know more of it than you might prefer. It's a different dynamic. As Sophie Green mentions very well, if you live in a city, you don't expect that every person on the street is someone you recognise. In a small town, you do expect every person on the street is someone you recognise. And so the dynamics of your interaction with your community are quite different, and I think she describes that quite well. She does this through a number of different characters. This book is really about the list of women in it, and I very specifically do mean women. My main point of contention with this book, I guess, would be that it's quite misandrous. That's man-hating. It's all the men in the early sections are nasty. And sure, a lot of men are nasty, a lot of women are nasty too, but the unmitigating aspect of men characters in at least this much of the book was that they were all assholes. And yes, men can be assholes. In relationships between men and women, you often do find that the power dynamic can be more heavily slanted toward men. And this, by the way, is written before the Sydney Olympics. When is it? 1998. So there are some quirks about the storylines that I feel may be more relevant to the 90s than to the 2020s. Anyway, if any of my readers are strongly into the Bechdel test, I think it's pronounced Bechdel. I always think of it as the Bechamel test, which can be confusing for people. I know at least one person who may watch this video is strong into the Bechdel. So, thank you, Wikipedia. All the money I've invested in you over the years is well worth it. Here's what Wikipedia has to say about it. The Bechdel test, also known as the Bechdel-Wallace test, is a measure of the representation of women in film and other fiction. The test asks whether a work features at least two female characters who have a conversation about something other than a man. In some iterations, the requirement is that the two female characters be named characters. So, it definitely meets that test. The opposite of the test would not be met. There aren't many men in it. They're only seen through the eyes of the women, and normally not in a very flattering light. Which, I mean, is okay. Anyway, so we see that if that's going to bother you, and I did see at least one person on Goodreads did find that a little bit bothersome. If you don't want to end up feeling at the end of the book that all women hate men, might not be your best book ever. Just quietly warning you. Okay, so we see this book through the eyes of different women. One is Alex. She's a teacher. She's a single mum. She always has been a single mum. She got pregnant at 19. She had her daughter. The man pissed off because all men are assholes, as we've established. She doesn't get along with her mother, though her mother and her daughter love each other. Her daughter hates her for moving them from Sydney to Bellbird River, but Alex's plan is to actually spend more time with her daughter. Alex made me fervently grateful that I never had any kids. It just was unpleasant, the whole thing. She's miserable most of her time. Her daughter's suffering bullying at school and she can't or won't do anything about it. Again, it's still the 2020s. That level of bullying in small towns is often endemic. And I think it would be easier to solve in the 2020s than it probably would have been in the 90s, but it still seemed like that whole aspect of it was largely swept under the carpet and solved in an unlikely way. Sorry. So we've also got Victoria. Victoria is like the town matriarch. She lives in this beautiful house built by her great-great-grandfather or something. And at the beginning of this, we find out that her husband of however many years, father of her children, has hooked up with a young woman 20 years younger than her, and because all men are assholes. At exactly this time, her cousin, who is an opera singer, Gabrielle, comes back to Bellbird River, and it turns out that Gabrielle has had an operation that on nodules on her vocal cords, and as a result of that, she feels that she may never be able to sing opera again. And since that is pretty much her whole identity, she's suffering from that. Gabrielle, incidentally, was my favourite character. I loved the opera connection. I would have liked to see more music in general, but I would have loved to see more opera connection. My godmother sang opera before she married. So Gabrielle, I found a really enjoyable character. Victoria and Gabrielle are two characters that you may find unlikely, abrasive, I don't know. They're both very older women and very strong-willed. It's unusual to find older women in fiction at times, so I did enjoy that aspect. And the two of them who knew each other as when they were children, but who are now relating as adults, one of whom has never left this town, knows everyone in it, and is kind of loved and respected by everyone. That's Victoria. Gabrielle, who left, travelled all the way around the world, came back, I think for the first time. She didn't like the town, she was happy to leave it. Those two perspectives of seeing the town and how people interact in it were excellent. A young woman, well, I think she's young. She doesn't think she's young. She is called Janine. She's a local baker. Her parents owned the bakery before her. Her life kind of went off the rails when she was young, when her brother developed schizophrenia. At least we don't blame him for developing schizophrenia. That's something. At which point she developed a eating disorder that's never terribly well explained, but lots of women do. And she's now a functioning member of society, but socially she struggles a bit. Then there's another one, Debbie. Debbie is the one... Yes, Debbie was recently released from prison. She embezzled some money. White-collar crime, I believe, is the most common reason for female inmates in Australian prisons. She was released. She needed a job, so she moved to this property where she's going to be the cook and housekeeper for, I think it's Wattlebird, something beginning with W. And she's moved there because her ex-husband has taken both the children away, doesn't want her to see them, and they're living in Tamworth. Again, 1990s might have been different, but I feel like people being excluded from their children's lives because they'd been in prison I feel even in the 90s, there was a lot there to help you reconnect with your family after leaving prison, especially on a white-collar crime embezzling charge. Yeah, anyway, so Debbie feels a great deal of shame in this. There's other ones. Alex, Victoria. The problem with this is we encounter these women when they join the choir. Gabrielle and Victoria kind of force each other to join. Alex wants to meet new people. She's just moved there. Debbie and Janine's been a member for a while. Debbie joins. I can't remember what she joined. The three younger women, it's sometimes a little bit hard to tell them apart. About halfway through the book, when we started a new section with Debbie or Alex, I had to stop for a moment and think, which one is she? So I feel like the characters weren't as well defined as they could be. It wasn't a big thing, but there's not that many of them that I feel like they could have been better defined. Each one of them is a bit of a character, but they're also a bit of a stereotype. And the stereotype element means that it's hard to connect with them. I would have found Alex hard to connect with anyway, because her life choices seem so bizarre and random. But Debbie and Janine never really have very much of a strongly developed character. You see them through what they do, not through who they are. Anyway, what all of them do is join the choir. One of the two men who isn't an arsehole in this whole book, actually both of the men who aren't an arsehole in this whole book are in the choir. One of them is the choir leader called Warwick. He's a good character. The other one is Jimbo. He kind of exists for Deus Ex Machina purposes to bail someone out later on, as far as I can tell. In the choir, you see interactions, and that's kind of the focus where all the individual women in the story meet. So that's the focal point for all of them. It's not bad. It's a good book. It's what you expect from a cozy, non-challenging book. A bit of a comfort read, a bit of a palate cleanser. It worked for all that. I don't think it's ever going to be a life-changing book, but that's okay. Not all of them need to be. And let's see. The setting, I think I mentioned earlier. The small town will be familiar to anyone in Australia, or possibly even anywhere, who's ever lived in a small town. But small things are inserted like wattle trees, magpies. It feels Australian. I kept visualising it as Glen Innes, which used to, by the way, have a most amazing bakery with some of the best pies in New South Wales, in my opinion. But the author makes it clear that this mythical town, is actually closer to Tamworth. Tamworth and Armidale keep being mentioned, so it's kind of situated there. It's a good town, developed with a light enough touch that any town that you know can be inserted there. And yeah, it was a fun book. I seem to have talked for a lot about a book that didn't really attract or require an awful lot of attention. It's got pretty little. It takes place over a year, and at each season or month you've got pretty little illustrations, pen and ink illustrations of different Australian birds, which is nice. Yeah, there's a lot to like about this book. I would recommend it to anyone who likes reading Australiana and who likes reading about women. That's women living cosy lives where not a lot happens, and the challenges are negligible. The stories never really end or resolve. It just stops at one point. It's a natural stopping point, but there's no huge story arc. That's what I'm saying. It's just fun. It's cozy. It's pretty. It's nice. And it's very, very Australian. So if these are things that you think you'll like, by all means, I would recommend the Bellbird River Country Choir.